Hi, I'm Teresa Opeka with Carolina Journal. In the studio today, I have Congressman Dan Bishop. He is the Republican nominee for Attorney General in North Carolina. Welcome, Congressman. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm delighted to have a chance to be with you.
That's great. That's great. So, for the folks who don't really know you too well, get a little bit of a background, get to know you, where you're from, your previous positions, your family.
Yeah, happy to.
Maybe your favorite song, stuff like that.
I guess most important thing is I've been married to Joe for 26 years in late September, and we have one son, Jack, who went to NC State undergrad, is now in Carolina Law School, and so a small family. I've grown up in Charlotte, and lived in Charlotte all my life. I've practiced law for 29 years, doing business litigation, complex cases. I've been very, we had occasion, because my opponent in this race for Attorney General has suggested that I didn't have relevant experience. He'd been 3 years an assistant district attorney, but I spent 29 years, and we looked it up. The court system databases are now you're able to do this. I've got 403, I think it was, lifetime appearances in the state and federal trial courts and appellate courts in North Carolina, and always generally in business controversies, representing often the under-resourced party as compared to the big firms we've confronted, and or we were competed against, I suppose. And so that is kind of the predominant. I've mostly been a private sector person, but I've now had a fair amount of political experience as well.
Yeah.
I was a county commissioner in Mecklenburg County, and that was my first entry into public service. That was in 2004 to 8, and frankly, I didn't anticipate I'd do any more politics after that, but it's kind of worked out a different way. About 6 years later, in 2014, I decided to run for state house and was elected. Served one term there that was quite consequential in some ways, and then was elected to the state senate 2016 and 2018. And in the 2018 congressional election went awry, as some will recall, and ultimately a special election was called for the 9th district congressional seat, and I entered that primary with 9 other people in a very shortened special election for Congress, and won that primary, and then was able to win the seat. So I've been elected to Congress 3 times, serving now in the 8th district. That's been sort of a musical chairs kind of a routine. Everybody, I'm sure the folks who are watching your podcast or whatever will know all the details of that. But have served in the Congress on the Judiciary and the Homeland Security committees, and I think there's been a lot of interesting things. I've been a member of the House Freedom Caucus, and was one of the 20 who believed we ought to take a seriously new approach in the beginning of this Congress in 2023. As we elected a speaker, we ought to make decisions about legislative policy and doing things in the way, restoring regular order and restoring the procedures in the House that make the voices truly democratic, rather than sort of having a last-minute omnibus or a continuing resolution kick the can down the road.
Sure.
So that's kind of a fair summary of how I've gotten to this point, and now, of course, I'm running for Attorney General of North Carolina.
Sure. So as you mentioned, you had such a successful career in Congress. Why leave?
Because I think there's a place that I can be of greater consequence and do more for North Carolina and North Carolinians than I could as a continuing member of Congress. And I will say that I have a safe district. The easiest path would be to return to Congress, and I could stay there another 5 years or another 10 years, and most do. But the Attorney General's office in North Carolina, and the phenomenon of the state Attorney General across the country, has enormous potency and opportunity to make change. And I would also say that what goes hand in hand with that is I don't think there's any institution in America that is more in jeopardy than the institution of law. And so the broad term that I use for it is lawfare. People have heard that term, and sometimes they mean something quite specific, but I mean it in the broadest sense. the law is the tool that secures our ordered liberty. It provides the ordered part of the ordered liberty. And we are seeing increasingly in many, many ways, certainly maybe most importantly in the criminal justice infrastructure, but across the entire law, we're seeing, and certainly the public-facing parts of the law, we're seeing people distort, manipulate the mechanisms of law for ideological reasons. And we are moving away from, not because anybody's honest enough to admit it, maybe, but we're moving away gradually and sometimes at pell-mell speed from the idea of the neutral and non-ideological application of law. And so the Attorney General's Office of North Carolina serves as an opportunity to restore law and order and keep people safe by being the type of top law enforcement officer who projects confidence in and works collaboratively to improve the effectiveness of the criminal justice infrastructure. And at the same time, to be a part of some of these, in fact, become a leader in some of the nationwide controversies that folks, again, I think who watch your broadcast will be familiar with, where you've seen state attorneys general step forward and be instrumental in the development of the major questions doctrine by the Supreme Court, or the elimination of the retreat from the Chevron deference and things like that, where the administrative state, in a time where Congress is sort of neutralized and stagnant and has receded from its own responsibility to make law, agencies and bureaucrats and presidents through those agencies attempt to make law often well beyond their power. And it is, again, state attorneys general that have stepped into the void in order to stop those abuses of people's rights and the abandonment of law by bureaucrats who have an agenda.
So what do you think is working, not working in the current Attorney General's administration at this moment?
It's interesting. What I just said is something that a lot of North Carolinians will not necessarily be aware of until they receive a couple of examples. But the last two attorneys general, Roy Cooper started off as a moderate, and by the time he ended, he had become woke. And Josh Stein's been woke the whole time, and my opponent is woke. And that actually means something very akin to what I said about lawfare. But they have, there are innumerable examples where the Attorney General, the last two incumbent Attorney Generals, who are the state's lawyers, have picked and chosen which laws they like and will enforce. And they will maintain sort of a patina or a fig leaf of an explanation when they decide not to support a law, not to defend law, or to nullify it, take some action, sort of legal mechanistic action, kind of nullifying law, to claim that they are acting, the Constitution always outranks the statute of the General Assembly, but they are on extravagant arguments, or arguments that you can always dream up some argument that a statute is unconstitutional, but even when you know it's almost certainly not. That's not the job of the Attorney General. The job of the Attorney General, just the way as if a lawyer were representing you, has an obligation of zealous representation of your rights and interests. Wherever there is an argument that is a good faith, non-frivolous argument in support of your position, the lawyer should be making that argument. By the same token, that's what the Attorney General should be doing for the state to defend law. Let me give you the most notorious example, I think, is that voter ID has been the law in North Carolina since 2013. It was enacted by the legislature. It was litigated. It was enacted by as a state constitutional amendment by overwhelming vote of the people in 2018. And yet the last two attorneys general, Cooper first, Stein then, have consistently litigated or taken litigation positions against implementation of that simple expedient to secure the vote, to expand confidence in elections processes, because you just the same way when you go to a hotel or the airline or anything else you do in life, you tender a document or a card to indicate who you
Right.
are. And so it comes to the pass that this year, in this primary this year, was the first time that's ever been implemented. After it's been law more than a decade. That is hazardous ultimately to our constitutional system, not only because you're not getting things that are chosen by the people through their elected representatives to, once they get put into law, to actually happen, but also because you set up the Attorney General's office as if it is a policy counterweight to the elected legislature. That is anti-constitutional. And my opponent says I'm intemperate and he'll call me an extremist, but I'm the guy that wants to restore law and order to where you enforce all of the law and you're not making the law from an executive position. And so I think that's I think it is a compelling and very significant controversy in this campaign, and there's a very robust campaign, and I believe that's the reason that, as I've been told the other day, this is going to be the most expensive race for a state attorney general in the nation's history.
Sure, sure, yeah. So what do you think is the biggest issue facing North Carolina right now?
It flows from what we've been talking about, the political manipulation or the political ideologizing law rather than just enforcing it. But its impact that is of greatest significance is crime. So crime is at sustained 10-year highs. I can tell you from anecdotal experience, going all across North Carolina, crisscrossing North Carolina for the last year, I can tell you from common experience, and I think, I imagine you probably have sensed it as well, but I can tell you from data too. People are fearful of crime, and they know that crime is rising and there seems to be another lurid headline every day. When you couple that with another abandonment of law, and that is the way our border security operates as a country, and that Biden has opened the borders, he's done catch and release on a level that Obama never thought about doing, setting records consistently, and from the position of the Homeland Security Committee and Judiciary, I've watched and illuminated that for the country. But the policies that have been pursued by Alejandro Mayorkas as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security are in brazen defiance of law. So Congress has enacted detention mandates, numerous ones, and he would just write a memo and issue it to DHS and say, we're flatly not going to follow those laws. And so you've seen 10 million people enter the country, not in stable living environment, circumstances. They don't have roots. They have not had an opportunity to assimilate into the culture. And it just produces more disorder, disconnected minors. And so that has exacerbated the crime that otherwise is up, because from the time that Democrats introduced the single worst policy idea in the history of American politics, and that was defund police. So that has been a sustained problem. Media and some politicians are anxious to tell you that we've turned the corner, that it's resolved, that crime is now falling. It hasn't, by anybody's measure, fallen to the levels of pre-pandemic levels. And in North Carolina, the stats continue to shock. So Charlotte had, for the first 6 months of this year, reported another 36% increase in homicides. There was also an increase in rapes. A shocking statistic of a 300% increase in juvenile homicides. The two words are almost shocking to put together.
Right.
So 12 kids killed somebody in Charlotte the first 6 months of 2024. But it's not just Charlotte. Raleigh, actually I would say that you'll have a hard time finding this report. You have to dig. But Raleigh police reported a 75% increase in homicides in the first 6 months of the year. Also an increase in rapes. And so people are fearful of all that, and you can find then that have anecdotes that have, as I say, there's a lurid headline every day or two. The example of a Honduran 18-year-old in Charlotte in the company of a 16-year-old unidentified person, probably also an illegal immigrant, both illegal immigrants probably, who went through the city on a random shooting spree. Random. Killing one person, injuring a number of others. I could give you a list as long as my arm. It's almost as if the left is trying to convince people that we've got to accede to a new normal in which you are going to be fearful. That we can't have law and order return to the levels that we achieved, after the peaks of the 1990s. And I don't buy that. And that is the entire purpose of this campaign, is they don't have to buy that. And if people feel fearful, if they fearful for themselves or their own or their children, there's a reason for it. They're not imagining things, and it can be set right. And those states that choose to set it right will be like Texas and Florida, the booming states that do well, because chaos, not fixing it is going to produce an ever-increasing chaos in the leftist blue cities that adopted in particular. San Francisco would be maybe the ultimate expression of that.
New York City too. You see that in New York.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
New York, Chicago,
Yeah, yes.
notorious, and people that get busy arguing in Congress. Well, it's a lot of red states that have, Mobile, Alabama, or something. They'll say, and I'm not at war with any of that. Wherever you abandon the idea that police need to be plentiful, present, and taking on all levels of crime, wherever you elect a prosecutor who vows not to prosecute people for criminal acts on a neutral, blindfolded, and impartial manner, but is going to start picking and choosing on this principle of restorative justice, or you're going to see new, pointy-headed academics, if you will, come forward in the company of leftists with, attacks on bail practices, so that you have far less occasion to have people who've committed violent crime be detained because they're dangerous to society pending trial. All of those things are resulting in people being killed and harmed. Often the people who are in the least capable, economic circumstances in society, and it can be stopped, and it should. And if I'm Attorney General, I'm going to collaborate tightly across the criminal justice infrastructure to turn it around.
Okay, all right. So on this issue and other issues, how do you differ from your opponent?
Drastically.
We touched on
Vastly.
it a little bit, but yeah.
We do.
But yeah.
And I think that I've sought to do nothing in politics more than be clear and to respect the choice that voters make. I'm the last person in the political realm to try to go and be all things to all people, or to attempt to deceive or mislead anybody about what I believe. And so I try to be very clear. My opponent's record is quite radical in the other direction. He marched with defund police protesters when all that happened in Charlotte in, I guess, 2000. When he ran briefly for the United States Senate in 2021, he supported vocally the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which, to invoke George Floyd's name, is supposed to clothe it with some kind of thing you've got to accept. But it was, the core of it was to intimidate and demoralize and denigrate and delegitimize policing and police officers, especially the idea of stripping them of qualified immunity, which is a doctrine that exists, a legal doctrine that's existed for decades and decades, to recognize the fact that they're not just you and me. They're doing something every day in which they put themselves in harm's way to protect people from crime. And they need to be held accountable when people go over the line. There's no question about that. But anyway, my opponent supported that legislation. He voted in the General Assembly. He voted against making it a felony to assault a police officer during a riot. He voted against every pay increase that the General Assembly gave to the Highway Patrol and other policing agencies during the long time he was in the state Senate. He has been radically left in his criminal justice record. I'll say one other anecdote if we've got time.
Sure.
One of the significant things Congress did there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of deadlock up there, partisan deadlock, getting things through both houses and signed by the president. But one place where we had an accomplishment is that the D.C. City Council, the City Council for the District of Columbia, passed two very notorious pieces of legislation. One was to completely rewrite their criminal code, their criminal law. And they drastically slashed sentences. They eliminated the concept of mandatory minimums for certain crimes. It was so radical that Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., vetoed the bill. They passed it over her veto. Of course, Congress has power over the D.C. City Council, and in the House we passed a bill to disapprove their law. And it was a Republican bill, but unusually in Congress, 34 Democrats supported it in the House. Chuck Schumer's Senate passed it. Joe Biden signed it because it was that bad. Jeff Jackson, who professes to be a bipartisan guy and sort of makes a big thing on TikTok and for speaking to the camera, these little videos he does of being, very moderate voiced and so forth. But he voted with the radicals who refused even to join that change, that legislation in the House. There was another bill about D.C. They passed in D.C. something similar to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, an anti-police bill. And by the way, the context in which they passed it is the officer count, the sworn officer count of the Metropolitan Police Department in the Washington, D.C. drops every month, has dropped every month slightly. It is a declining police force from the time of 2020, the appearance of COVID and all the rioting and so forth that occurred until now. That continues to be the pattern. And so that was another bill that the mayor of D.C. vetoed and Congress attempted to reverse. Now, fewer Democrats joined, but still there was an appreciable number of Democrats who joined Republicans in the House to try to reverse that. Again, Mr. Bipartisan, Jeff Jackson, was not among them. So his record is radical. He is very smooth and very and adopts or takes a pose of moderation. But this state, as I pointed out one other time, the motto of North Carolina is to be rather than to seem, right? Esse quam videris. And so he may seem to be moderate, and he certainly attempts to project an image of that, but people need to understand and need to be thoughtful about their vote because he is, in fact, he is as woke as they come. And if you are one who is inclined to embrace all these changes I've described in our criminal justice and the way law is, they pick and choose in the Attorney General's office, that's exactly what you're going to get in Jeff Jackson.
Okay. One last question for you. Why should someone vote for you?
If they want their family to be safe, if they want their son or daughter or their wife or husband to be able to go to a ball game or go uptown to a play or in any number of ordinary events in life, to feel secure, to live with a sense you're not constantly in fear, then that would be the reason to vote for me. And if you believe, as I do, that the reason we've received as a heritage a nation that has been the most flourishing on earth, the most successful on earth, that it is predicated on original ideas in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that government's very purpose is to secure core rights, and those core rights come from God, and the instrumentality through which we do all that is the law. And so that when Letitia James becomes Attorney General of the state of New York, she does something that no one's ever done before in seeking, in being a candidate for an office clothed with prosecutorial power. She vowed that she would use her power to destroy a political enemy. And whatever you think about this, everybody knows what I'm talking about, but she's the first ever to do that. Alvin Bragg did something similar, frankly not quite as egregious as she did. That is the end of law if it is allowed to become the pattern. And people have said to me, I've been on a radio interview one time when the interview was, well, I think you need to do the same thing they're doing to your guys when you get in office. And the answer to that actually is no. That's not correct. If we are down that path to where that is the only option left, we will be no better than the banana republic, where when there's a change in government, you throw your opponents in the slammer or you execute them or what, and this country will cease to be what it has been. So, as I said, we're going to restore safety so that people can feel safe, and we're going to restore law and the respect for law and the proper understanding of the constitutional role of the Attorney General to serve the law, not his own ideology.
Okay. Congressman Bishop, it was a pleasure having you here today. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for letting me share with your viewers, and thank you for what you do.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.